So sexual reproduction is a lot different. Meiosis is a lot different from mitosis. We're definitely not going to get into the nitty-gritty of how it works, but before, with mitosis, we were creating two identical cells, and they were basically clones of each other. But with meiosis, we're creating this mixture of genetic information. And we're going to kind of talk about how that process occurs. We're not going to talk about the nitty-gritty process, but we're going to talk about why a parent, like let's say the Dugans or Duggans, they can have so many kids and none of them are the same. Even though they've had, I don't know, like 5 bajillion kids, none of them are exactly the same. So we'll talk about how that happens. I think they really had just 10 or 12, but whatever. Before we get there, let's do what we term haploid. Doesn't that sound like half? So that's going to be where we're going to take our genetic material and divide it in half. And that's going to only happen in our gametes. And our gametes are going to be things that we produce that have only half of our genetic information, the sperm and the egg. When you combine the sperm and the egg, it's called fertilization. And then when you go ahead and have them come together and their genetic material combine to become two, they're going to be called the zygote. Let's go ahead and go over these. So again, what happens is some genetic material is going to be in the male or female. So it's going to be, let's do the male first, or let's do both. The genetic material is going to make these two individuals. In the testes or the ovaries is where we're going to take that genetic material and divide it in half. And that process is called meiosis. The reason why we have to do this is because human beings only have 46 chromosomes. And if you had an egg that had 46 chromosomes and a sperm that had 46 chromosomes, the next generation would have close to 100. And if that generation had children, then the next generation would have 200 chromosomes. And the cell can only hold so much genetic information, and it wouldn't work after some time. So we have to divide our genetic material in half all the time. So in the male, he's going to divide his genetic material in half to make sperm. And in the female, she's going to divide her genetic information in half to make eggs. So here, we started out in the males and the females, the normal adults, we had 46 chromosomes. Here, we have 23 chromosomes. And when the egg and the sperm come together to become a zygote, which just means that the egg and the sperm have come together and the genetic material has mixed, we're going to go back to that 46 number. So this eventually will become the offspring. And the offspring will have its normal genetic complement and be able to, in the future, do meiosis, where it's going to divide the genetic material in half. So just a quick recap. Half is going to be called the haploid. It's the sex cells. It's only going to happen in the egg and the sperm. And each one of those eggs and sperm individually are going to have 23 chromosomes. In a normal cell, in mitosis, we call them diploid. Diploid meaning 2 copies, one you got from mom, one you got from dad. And they're going to be our somatic cells. Somatic just means that there are normal cells that produce us, where our haploid cells are going to be just cells that reproduce to make offspring. So again, I'm not going to get into all the different phases of meiosis. But basically what happens is we have this process. Remember the prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase? We have it happen twice. And because it happens twice, it takes that genetic material and divides it in half. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of how that actually happens, but just trust me. Through this process, we go from double genetic material to half the genetic material. The only reason I don't want to get into it is because students get mitosis and meiosis confused on exams, so I don't even want to go into the nitty-gritty. But if you've heard them in the past, meiosis has 2 phases. That's why I put the slide together. What I did want to focus in on is why there's so much genetic diversity. So why could we have somebody like Genghis Khan, if you remember him from history, he had hundreds of kids. So wherever he'd go and conquer, he would go through a village, have sexual relations with a bunch of women, they would get pregnant, and then he would leave, and then he'd go to the next village, and next village, and next village, and it's been estimated that he's had hundreds of kids. First deadbeat dad, I guess. So what ended up happening is none of his children look alike. You know, they look a little bit like him and the mom, and let's say he did choose one female, and they had, let's say, 100 kids with that one female. I know it's statistically impossible, but let's just go with my little example. They could have every kid line up, and they're all going to be different. Let's say they could even have 1 million children. Granted, I know, you're rolling your eyes, it's impossible. But if they could, with that one male, one female individual coming together, still none of their kids would be identical, assuming they never had twins. Twins is a little different situation, but if you had one individual child and you compared them to all the other children in my example, none of them would be exactly the same. And this is because what happens is these chromosomes, when they line up, they have different copies of genes. You choose individuals to mate with because they're different from you. Now, I'm not saying that they're so radically different, but they have some genes that are different than yours. So when you do go ahead and have an offspring, it's going to be a mixture of those different genes, and some of them will be turned on, and some of them will be turned off. So let's say somebody with blue eyes mated with somebody with brown eyes. We all know that brown eyes are dominant, but every once in a while they will have a child with blue eyes. And it's because some genes are turned on and some genes are turned off. We'll talk way more about that probability and things later, but that's kind of how it starts. Genes or chromosomes carry genes. So let's say this is the chromosome. You can see that this guy has in one specific spot a gene for making a black coat, and he'll also have a gene for making brown eyes. Oops, let me switch that back. The gene for black eyes and the gene for a brown coat, hair color. Over here, we have a similar mouse, same chromosome, we just colored them different because we just wanted to well, anyway, same spot is going to have the coat color, and same spot for eye color is going to be on both of them, and this one is going to lead to the pink eye. So depending on which gene you get, you're going to have more of the dominant colors or recessive colors, but if these two mated, we'll find that some of these genes will be turned on and some of them will be turned off. Some of this also happens in prophase, where there's this thing called crossing over. And can you see how, like, when we lined up those chromosomes in metaphase, what happens is we have this sort of intermingling of chromosomes, and they somewhat break. Let me show you the next picture. So we have chromosomes that are lined up. So these are, let's say, the ones that came from sperm from dad. This is from the egg from mom. When they're in that metaphase, even anaphase, in metaphase they're all lined up like this, and there's a little bit of this intermingling that's going on. And because of that, what happens is the DNA sort of tangles up on each other and breaks. And the repair is that, oops, we got a little bit from dad, and we got a little bit from mom. So when they separate, we have one chromosome that's still pretty much original and one that has a little piece from mom, but still mostly dad. We have one chromosome that's mostly mom and a little bit of dad, and then we have one that's all mom. And this is what gives us that genetic diversity. So this is why, you know, we know that mom has different genes than dad. Hair color, eye color, height, intelligence, all these different things. But when they cross over, we get some of this mixing occurring. And we only showed one site, but this is happening all over the chromosome, for all of the chromosomes. And that's why when we have offspring, they're different from us. here's some stats for you. I could run you through the numbers, but I'm not going to. And I don't want you to know them. But basically, this is just more of a gee whiz slide. If dad has 23 chromosomes that he's going to give out, and mom has 23 chromosomes that he gives out, there would be 70 trillion possibilities of offspring. So they could have 70 trillion children, and none of them would be identical. So you're 1 in a trillion, which actually just shows how awesome you are right there. And then if you really get into it, because a male does produce 43 million sperm per ejaculation, some will get up to 70 million, some will go down to 4 million, but the average is around 43 sperm per ejaculation. You were the one that swam the fastest and the furthest to the egg. So even there, you're pretty damn special. So if you take that number into it, you are super special. So that's really all I wanted to do, is talk about meiosis. I just wanted to talk about how the differences that you could have, why your children don't all look the same. And it's basically because of crossing over. Independent assortment is how they just cross which chromosome to take, and fertilization, which egg just makes it to, which sperm makes it to the egg fastest.